This is Ray, and I'm continuing my discussion with Jeff on the Sermon on the Mount. In the previous video, episode 3, he made the point to say his overall takeaway from the Sermon on the Mount was that it's preparing us, or Jesus' teaching is preparing us to live in the light of the age to come, meaning this teaching is helping us and helping sanctify us through to live for eternity instead of living simply for this life. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to make a quick, really kind of bare bones outline of the sermon. And then after this video, Jeff and I are going to start going through each part of the sermon piece by piece and breaking down each part, giving our own commentary on each component and section that I mentioned here. So I'm just going to get started. You can find the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. And I just want to say on the front end that the book of Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, and it's broken down into 5 sections, and each section concludes with a big teaching from Jesus. So the Sermon on the Mount is the first big teaching from Jesus, not only just in the book of Matthew, but in the New Testament. So it's section 1 and then Sermon on the Mount. So in the Sermon on the Mount, I break it down. Some people break it down differently. I break it down into 6 basic sections. So I have it as section 1 are the Beatitudes, which comes from the Latin word the Benedictus or Benedictus, which just means blessed. So we have the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, 3 through 11. And then Matthew 5, 13 through 16, we are exhorted to live differently. So that's section 1, the Beatitudes, and to live as salt and light, or to live differently from those that are in the world. Section 2, Jesus reiterates or clarifies that he's not rebelling against the law, that he's not rebelling against the Tanakh or the prophets, that his teachings are in line with the law and the prophets. And then he exhorts his followers to teach and obey the commandments that he's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. So that's section 2. Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets. Section 3 is where we start getting into some more of the practical life application ideas. So in section 3, Jesus is going to go through 6 major temptations that rest on humanity or sit on humanity. There are more than 6, and as you go throughout the entire Bible, there's many more mentioned. But I think that these are probably the 6 that weigh on us the most. And so Jesus, in his wisdom, I think, he thought it was appropriate to walk through these 6 temptations. So temptation number 1, found in Matthew 5, 21 through 26, is anger, and Jesus links anger to murder. Temptation number 2 in Matthew 5, 27 through 30 is immorality, or you could say lust. Temptation number 3 would be Jesus is going to do a teaching on divorce, but it's much bigger than that. It's also the disregarding of people in general. So you can find that in Matthew 5, 31 through 32. Matthew 5, 33 through 37, Jesus talks about making oaths or making promises, and he is exhorting his believers not to make false commitments. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. So if you say you're going to do something, you do it. Say you're not going to do something, don't do it. All right. Temptation number 5 is retaliation, taking matters into our own hands. You can see that in Matthew 5, 38 through 42. And then Matthew 5, 43 through 48, we see temptation number 6, which is resisting passive love. And as Jeff and I go through these, we're going to talk a lot about each one and why they're so important. So that's section number 3, the 6 temptations. Section 4 is going to be disciplines to practice in secret. So it's very interesting that Jesus teaches these things and then says, don't do these things and then tell everybody that you're doing them. Do them in secret. So section 4, disciplines to practice. Matthew 6, 1 through 4, Jesus talks about giving. That's in serving and in charitable deeds. So money and in serving. Don't just limit it to money. Then Matthew 6, 5 through 13, Jesus is going to do the Lord's Prayer, and he's going to give a small teaching on praying and how to carry our hearts in prayer. And then in Matthew 6, 14 through 15, we're going to get active forgiveness. So we're not going to be passively forgiving people or assuming that we have forgiven somebody because we let something go. We're going to be active in our forgiveness of people, and actually talk to them and look at them in the eye and have conversations with them that are meaningful related to the reconciliation in our relationships, which that links back to the sixth temptation, which is resisting passive love. Easy to love people. It's easy to love people that you like, but Jesus calls us to take it a step further and love people that we are struggling with. Okay. Discipline number 4 is fasting. So Jesus is going to do a small little excerpt on fasting, and everything he's doing in the Sermon on the Mount isn't like a huge teaching that he's teaching every single point. We get a lot of that through the rest of the scriptures, but he's touching upon them, letting them know that we should value these things and they should be relevant to our hearts. Okay. Section 5. Section 5 is interesting. It's how to think of our possessions and how to think of people. Okay, so Matthew 6:19 through 24 says, don't lay up treasures on earth, right? And then it says, it makes a distinction. It says, talks about having a clear eye, right? Having a clear eye. And then it says you can't serve two masters. And so I'm excited to get to that point. As you can see, I want to comment on it now, but I won't. But we're not to lay up our treasures on earth and have a clear eye and not serve two masters. Okay, and all three of those things are linked. And then this is also linked to it, Matthew 6:25 through 24, that we should not be anxious about our life, anxiety being linked to how we carry our possessions and how we think about people. Okay, and then Matthew 7:1 through 12 is working through relational reconciliation, which is a super interesting way that Jesus is going to teach us through that. It's probably the longest teaching I think that he probably has within the structure of the sermon. It's working through relational reconciliations. That's section 5. How do we think of our possessions and people? And then section 6 gets right down to the nitty gritty. And Jesus is going to talk about false teachers, false teachings, and how to avoid being led astray. He's going to do that by making two kind of, not really parables, but comparisons. It says there's a narrow way and there's a wide way. And then he compares two trees, and he says there's a healthy tree and there's a diseased tree, right? And so the point that he's making, he says, look back throughout the whole sermon. I just taught you how to be a healthy tree. I just taught you how to stand on the narrow way. So you need to obey that. And you can look at Matthew 5:19 for that exhortation of finding value for this sermon, or the things that Jesus is teaching within this sermon in your heart. Then at the end, he's going to lay two foundations. He's saying that you're going to build your life one way or another. You're going to build it on the rock, which is me, meaning Jesus, the Holy Spirit, or you're going to build it on sand, and you're going to build it on your own wisdom, and it'll be a life of foolishness. And so he makes those two comparisons, and all through that last section. So 6 main sections I break it down into. We're going to go through each one piece by piece, me and Jeff. So Jeff is going to start in the next video. Jeff, I was just going to say, we start on the Beatitudes. So I know Jesus goes up on the mountain. He's going to sit down like rabbis in that day would sit down to teach. And his disciples come up with him, and he opens up his mouth and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So in the next video, I'd love it if you just started commentating on your thoughts on the very first Beatitude.